From very early times, the Acropolis had been both the fortress and religious centre of Athens. It was sacred to many gods, but above all to Athene. The hill was crowned by the splendid series of buildings designed under Pericles, a programme of unparalleled cost and splendour, giving an impression of power and wealth that was the admiration of ancient Greece. The plain of Attica is dominated by the hill, with its massive retaining walls built to enclose the platform on which the temples stand. To the north lies the ancient city, its agora close under the cliffs of the sacred hill. We are going to look at the Periclean buildings on the Acropolis, whose architecture, sculpture and layout together provide a setting for the worship of Athene. Their relation to one another is important, but each is an individual work of art. Grandest is the Parthenon, deceptively simple and huge. The Erechtheion, smaller and more complex, houses the ancient statue of Athene Polias, the most sacred image of all. Then there is the Propylaea, with the little temple of Athene Nike alongside, a sacred gateway which links the entire composition and affords the only access to this high city, visible from afar but none too easily accessible. Most festivals involved a procession from the city to the Acropolis along the Panathenaic Way. This route, through the Agora, took its name from the Panathenaea, the birthday festival of Athene. As the climax to this festival, sacrifices and a robe for the goddess were taken in procession to the Acropolis. Just such a procession is shown in the famous Parthenon frieze. It's not an accurate portrayal, rather an idealized commentary, and of course an exquisite work of art. But by looking at sections of this frieze as we follow the route, we can show how the temples of the Acropolis functioned as a setting for the worship of Athene. The procession began out beyond the Hephaestion, a good half-mile from the Acropolis, where the road runs in from Eleusis. There, at the Dipylon Gate, the crowd assembled, and in the frieze we can find many of the participants. Riders are moving off, or preparing to mount. A small boy helps with his elder brother's tunic, a charming, almost sentimental touch. The procession is controlled by marshals, usually isolated figures, like this one, who provide a pause in the general rhythm of the composition. The frieze itself is largely given over to young men on horseback and charioteers with their drivers, who recall an ancient sport, a part of the festivities that emphasized military and athletic prowess. There are, of course, sacrificial animals, a necessary part of any festival. And there would have been many others, hoplites and basket bearers who aren't shown on the frieze. Mostly, though, it shows ranks of horsemen in various costumes escorting Athene's new robe to the shrine. The procession moved through the Agora, where the broad road led up towards the Acropolis. Some of the original paving survives, smooth enough for the ceremonial float on which the robe for Athene was displayed, and wide enough for chariots. It climbed steeply up to the clepsydra. Here, the procession paused, where a sacred spring oozed out from under the rocks, beneath the sacred caves and the splendidly dramatic bastion of the Propylaea. Cimon rebuilt this ancient spring with a rectangular draw basin and steps and a paved forecourt, part of an earlier program that was mostly swept aside by the Periclean buildings. The spring was important since water for sacrifices had to be carried up from here. This was usually done by women, but on the Parthenon frieze it is young men who carry the jars. The procession followed the hill round towards the ridge until the great gateway was revealed, perched on a high man-made bastion. This was the first complete tableau of the Periclean development. The building carefully controls your vision, seeming both to enclose and tower above you. Behind a pillared portico, 5 gates in the centre formed the entrance, and the processional way wound steeply up between the wings of the building to pass finally through the colonnaded central passage onto the Acropolis. This passage forms the axis of the entrance gateway and is the key to the entire site. A glance back shows the plain far below, and in the distance Salamis and the Piraeus. This model shows how the procession related to the main buildings. A small gate led to the west court of the Parthenon, but the main route led on to the great altar in a wide open space between the Parthenon and the Erechtheion. The Parthenon stood on the highest point of the hill, and opposite stood the smaller and more intimate Erechtheion, the ultimate destination of the peplos robe. Let's look at the propylaea in detail now. It's set on a steep and irregular sloping site. The foundations are fitted to the natural rock and are of fine ashlar masonry. This is laid in receding courses which add stability to the high platform on which the building itself stands. Notice the inward thrust of the corner bastion, and how the setbacks on the right are steeper than on the left, allowing the actual building to be placed with the precision required for solid marble construction. Yet all this can hardly be made out from below and is concealed from above. The building is a model of precision, a craftsman's answer to a series of problems. For instance, the 3-step stylobate is underlined by a projecting course of dark marble. Each step is articulated by a carefully cut rebate at the base. At the corner, the dark marble runs into white, and there is even a mitered joint, making a subtle transition to a 4-step stylobate that is proportionally right for the larger columns of the centre. This makes a unified composition with wings and centre distinct parts of a single whole. One is scarcely aware of the off-centre door of the north wing. The composition is so well balanced. The order is Doric, simple and precise. The awkward ending of the entablature of the wings on both sides is barely visible, and the complete absence of sculpture means that attention is concentrated on the quality of the stonework. Even now, the sharp edges give a sense of clarity that only the best craftsmanship could achieve. Many of the masons on this building had previously worked on the Parthenon. The stonework is beautifully cut, and the precision of the fluting is a positive delight. Beside this clear and logical Doric facade was placed the elegant little temple of Athene. Its small scale comes as a shock after the monumental gateway. It stands high on an isolated bastion above the processional ramp. The stockiness of the columns is belied by the elegance of the Ionic order. The western, more visible side has a false porch, and here the frieze is full of swirling movement that could be clearly seen from far below. The bastion was edged by a stone balustrade, the outer face carved with figures of Nike and Athene. The design of the figures and sweep of the drapery is particularly elegant. One is the famous sandal binder. The temple was reached through the south wing of the propylaea. On the altar in front of it was offered the first and finest of the oxen in the Panathenaic procession, a sacrifice which links this temple to the main ceremony. The sacrificial beasts are from the Parthenon frieze again. Their design suggests a slower pace, reminding us that as the procession moved onto the sacred enclosure of the Acropolis, there was increasing solemnity. The horsemen and charioteers probably never entered the precinct. Those in the procession who did climb the steep last section of the ramp passed through the outer hall of the propylaea, moving from bright sunlight into darkness before returning to daylight on the hilltop. A row of tall columns flanked the passage to the main door. They are narrower than the Doric columns of the facade, which in fact hide them, but being Ionic, their natural proportions make them taller, reaching up to the high ceiling. As Pausanias says, the gateway had a roof of white marble unrivaled for the beauty and size of its stones. The slabs were elaborately coffered and originally painted in blue and gold with bands of ornament along the beams. From the dark hall, worshippers passed through the gateway into the sunlit temple precinct, an impressive transition from dark to light. Both the Parthenon and the Erechtheion were at once clearly visible, while directly ahead was the statue of Athene Promachos. This colossal figure, flanked by naval trophies, faces back almost along the axis of the gate towards Piraeus, suggesting a link with the Athenian navy, the basis of her imperial power. From the gate, the layout of the precinct is clear. The procession moved up towards the Parthenon, whose whole form is easily intelligible in three-quarter view. However, it's from the west court, with its great flight of stone-cut steps, that we get the first full view of the huge building. This is again in the severe Doric style, but subtly handled and enriched with a mass of fine carving. The huge pediment above was filled with figures, and below was a complete row of carved metopes. Most of these are fine sculpture in their own right, yet here they are mere adjuncts to the building, perched high above eye level. This metope is one of few that are still in good condition. The bold diagonals and strong shadows of the high relief give it a dynamic quality that tells at a distance. There is some unevenness in style, but the best designs are thrilling. See how the sweep of the cloak here contrasts with the straining figure. Other designs are less satisfactory. But then, these metopes were a subsidiary element. The huge figures of the pediment above them would have been visually dominant. The composition is now totally shattered, though these two figures, replicas in fact, show the placing and scale. In addition to metopes and pediments, there was also a third sculptural element, the frieze. This was set high up behind the colonnade, seen dimly and at intervals between the columns. It forms a band at the top of the naos wall, close under the coffered ceiling. It runs from the west end of the building in a continuous procession reaching a climax over the eastern entrance. This section is the only part that remains in situ. Most of it's in the British Museum. The whole work is a subtle and delicate piece of carving, a religious sculpture, not storytelling. The rider's idealized heads gaze forward abstractedly, and few figures actually face us. But within the single overall design, there is constant variety. What is really impressive is the subtlety of the low-relief carving and the design where horses' heads alternate with riders. The diagonals of the horses give an insistent forward movement, while the pace is varied by the pattern of the horse's legs, originally silhouetted against a dark blue background. Remember, however, that the frieze is only part of the larger whole. Sculpture and architecture work together here and are equally fine. The crisp logic of Doric conceals many subtleties. The slight curve of the stylobate is barely visible, and you should remember that all this precision was achieved on the site of a half-finished earlier building. You can see both foundations here at the southeast corner. Vertical and horizontal rhythms all unite in a building that is deceptively simple. This is the entrance front, and this pediment too was filled with sculpture. The few pieces that remain, now in the British Museum, show the quality of the work. It was originally a tightly knit group, filling the low triangular space and building up from reclining figures to the central scene of Athene's magical birth. The composition was symmetrical. The rising chariot of the sun in one corner is matched on the right by the exhausted horses of the moon. A close look at the details of the architecture reveals its quality. The vertical flutes enhance the sense of height in the columns. The entasis, or tapering, has a similar effect. There are subtle variations in the spacing, but each column is placed precisely over the top joint of the stylobate. And the sharp edges of the flutes make for a delicate play of light. The simple shapes of the capitals provide a clear but easy transition from vertical pillar to horizontal beam. This is architecture designed to be seen in a strong, clear light. One other effect of this abstract geometry is that it conceals the immense scale of the building. Intermediate steps on the stylobate led to an inner porch through which the ancient visitor would have passed into a dim interior dominated by the huge gold and ivory statue of the Parthenos, and lit only from the door and by lamps. This was one of Phidias' masterpieces, and incidentally the only part of the sculptural program we know he actually made himself. Only these blocks remain to show the size of its base. The walls of the naos are gone, and so is the great door opening east towards Hymettus and the dawn. Though the restored door of the western room gives some indication of the original space, it is impossible to recapture a real sense of the interior as it was. The ruined colonnades give a different pleasure, and it's important to distinguish the romantic appeal of ruins from any recreation of the Acropolis in use. In the 5th century, the processional route led eastwards beside the Parthenon to the altar in the space between it and the Erechtheion. The climax of the frieze above the entrance of the Parthenon shows one of the solemn moments in the ritual. The presence of the seated gods signals a complete change of atmosphere. The scene is flanked by groups of girls bringing offerings, the first females in the procession. Then come groups of older men, surely the eponymoi, heroes of the 10 Attic tribes. And beyond these are the gods, seated and larger in scale than the humans. Hera and Zeus, king of the gods, head one group. On the other side sits Athene, his daughter, accompanied by the craftsman god Hephaestus. The actual centerpiece is the so-called peplos scene, where a young girl and a priest, priestess and attendants, are folding a robe. The gift of a robe to Athene was the climax of the Panathenaic festival. The final dedication, however, took place not in the Parthenon but the Erechtheion, where the ancient cult statue of Athene Polias was housed. This is a willfully complex building, the different parts loosely articulated, unlike any other Greek temple. The building is famous for its caryatid porch. Just possibly this was used to display the robe of Athene. The carved maidens seem to balance the roof on their heads like water carriers. The folds of their robes echo the fluted columns, but there is nothing rigid about them. A free composition was essential to allow the accommodation of several sacred places, both within the temple and in its garden. For instance, the north porch is twice the normal depth. An opening in its roof commemorated the hurling of Poseidon's trident when he and Athene competed for the land of Attica. A hole in the floor marked where it struck the rock. And through the little door to the garden is the sacred olive tree, the gift with which the goddess won that contest, while under the caryatid porch was the tomb of Cecrops, first king of Attica. As a building, the Erechtheion's particular quality lies in the richness of its decoration. Ornament is freely used in a way that provides an ordered variety, with the effect of the carved patterns heightened and extended by the original painting. There is richness and variety, but also clarity within the structure of the Ionic order. The capitals are unusually elaborate, yet they support a strictly regular architrave, giving an impression of both profusion and delicacy that is in marked contrast with the Parthenon. The Erechtheion, the Parthenon and Propylaea are all part of the same precinct. Here, Pericles and his designers managed to combine buildings of great richness, variety and beauty into a unified shrine that remains an enduring monument to the glory of Athene and her city.